It's finally here, the most controversial movie of 2025. Freaking Superman? And after years of waiting, this highly anticipated comic book film has arrived, officially starting James Gunn's new DC universe. After several other halfway starts, that is. Here we find a Clark Kent played by David Corenswet, who's been doing this Superman thing for a few years now. He's mostly well liked by the public, and has found a solid balance between his alter ego and his superhero lifestyle. But danger arrives in the form of Lex Luthor, played by Nicholas Hoult, a maniacal billionaire who devises a dastardly scheme to destroy the Kryptonian once and for all. Along the way, our favorite alien hero will encounter other caped crusaders, wacky sci-fi shenanigans, a superpowered dog, and shocking revelations that will force him to reckon with his role in the world. And needless to say, there's quite a bit riding on this film. As previously stated, director James Gunn is using this Superman picture as a vehicle to jumpstart the new DC cinematic universe. And following the, mixed reactions garnered by the studio's previous attempt, if this fails, then the whole thing is off to a shaky if not calamitous start. And Superman as a character is already on thin ice with the general public. Look, I make no bones about it, Superman is my favorite comic book hero. I want people to love him the way I do. And I actually really liked Man of Steel and have defended that film for 12 years now. But while I've always liked it, I'll admit that I've never quite loved it. 12 years. God, I'm getting old. And when James Gunn was announced as the new director, I was cautiously optimistic. The dude is batting 1,000 when it comes to solid comic book movie adaptations, and he's always had an ability to make general audiences care for characters whom they didn't prior. If any filmmaker could make Superman connect with people, it would be the guy who made Rocket Raccoon and Groot household names. But there was a wave of negativity surrounding Superman since it was announced a few years ago. So much so that I kinda dread the comment section of this video as I write this review. All I can give is my honest opinion, both as an objective movie reviewer and as a massive fan of the character. And I actually saw this thing twice just to make sure that any bit of me that wanted to geek out and fanboy could be kept in check. So is the movie any good? Yeah. Yeah, it is. It really is. Now there are flaws here that I will discuss, but this is honestly the Superman film that I've wanted to see for years. And like me, if you've ever read one of his comics or seen an episode of the animated series and wished that we'd get a live action adaptation that embodied the spirit and energy of those works, then I have no idea how you could watch this thing and hate it. Right from the start, I adored how the movie opened. I mentioned before that this is decidedly not an origin story, and I think it's all the better for it. Because at this point, we've seen the origin of this character done time and time and time and time and time and time again. Look, we've all seen the memes about seeing Uncle Ben and the Waynes constantly getting killed, but I'd argue the Superman origin is even more saturated. Literally over half of this guy's stories are freaking origins, and at this point, if I see that rocket land in Kansas one more time, I'm gonna start throwing punches. But needless to say, that any doubt I had over Gunn helming this movie vanished within the first 5 minutes. Now, taking my love of this more comic booky approach out of the equation, I will admit that this intro might be jarring for some general audiences. There's a conflict at the heart of the plot which we never really see the beginning of, but sort of find ourselves dropped in the middle of. There is certainly context given, but it's all done through dialogue that tries to catch us up on what we've missed, almost as if we've picked up issue number 17 of a long-running comic series without reading what's come before. The best way I can describe it is like this. Imagine if you were watching Matt Reeves' The Batman, only it opened with Bruce Wayne investigating the mayor's death in his Batcave, and not with the actual murder scene or the crime scene investigation that happened, and that all happened off-screen. Again, I personally loved this creative decision and thought it started things off in a nice kinetic way, but I can 100% understand those who were a tad disoriented when it started. There is absolutely a rhythm to the film that may take a bit to get into, but if you give it that time, I promise you'll settle into it. And that rhythm also has to do with tone. James Gunn is borrowing heavily from the zany Silver Age era of the character, which lends itself to plenty of sci-fi goofiness. On my second viewing of Superman, a buddy of mine who wasn't as seasoned with the comics was taken aback by the style, which made complete sense to me. This takes a lot of inspiration from All-Star Superman, which was told in the same goofy sci-fi tone. And needless to say, I wasn't initially a fan of that story when I began my comic book journey. Of course, I've since seen The Error of My Ways and regard that book as an all-time classic that should be taught in schools. But I digress. And of course, we gotta talk about the dog. Crypto the Super Pup is featured prominently in the marketing, and he was actually in more of the movie than I thought he would be. At this point, we know Gunn can absolutely nail animal characters, and here is no exception. I found Crypto's inclusion to be quite a pleasant surprise, and his dynamic with Superman helped to flesh out the hero's more personal side. There is absolutely a narrative through line in James Gunn's Superman. All of the wacky, comic booky elements are in service of a solid story that puts the character in situations that challenge his outlook and the way of doing things. I've seen lots of critics say that plot events just kinda happen here without any rhyme or reason, but I couldn't disagree more. Now, I will say that the structure of the events and the way they were presented could have been handled a bit better. I've heard that in earlier versions of this movie, there were initially going to be title cards laced throughout, which broke up the plot in a series of days of the week. We'd open up on Monday and find ourselves going through the plot day by day, almost as if it was a week in the life of Superman. I personally feel that this chapter title dynamic would have been perfect to help give more structure to the more episodic nature of the plot and the conflict. And without getting too heavy into spoilers, it's the kind of conflict that we have seen before in DC media, but here's the difference. You now have David Cornsweat in the boots and cape. Guys, this dude absolutely has the sauce. I mean, we all should have known this because he's a Philly kid, but he perfectly embodies everything I've come to love about the character. He displays that perfect sense of Midwest dorkiness that fits his young superhero persona well. One of the best parts of the movie was just watching his performance. The guy could literally just be standing there and you go, yeah, that's Superman. Though I do wish we saw a bit more of his Clark Kent persona, more on that in a bit. His dynamic with Lois Lane, played by Rachel Brosnahan, is another highlight, and her version of the daring reporter is now my favorite portrayal of the character, period. In a lot of recent movies, Lois sort of became relegated to being the damsel in distress, always seemingly, falling off of tall things and drowning in a pool of water while trying to get a kryptonite spear that she already threw away 5 minutes ago. Anyway, but here, her involvement actually matters to the plot. Brosnahan infuses a lot of punk rock energy along with reporter moxie that feels ripped right out of the Hudsucker Proxy, and it was perfect. And of course, Nicholas Hoult was phenomenal as Lex Luthor. Hoult really is one of the best new actors we have working today, and here he continues to shine. His Lex is brilliant, egotistical, vindictive, but most of all, he was dangerous. And when it comes to these kinds of villains, it's so easy to fall into the trap of just making them whiny brainiacs. No, not that one. Who don't really pose a threat to the hero. But here, he's a legitimate threat, and I cannot wait to see which directions he goes in for later DCU projects. To sum up my thoughts on the cast as a whole, yeah, they were pretty great. This includes the Daily Planet crew, as well as the Justice Gang, with Eddie Gathegi as Mr. Terrific being a particular standout. But I would say that my biggest problem with James Gunn's Superman is that I just wanted to see more of these characters. The film clocks in at about 2 hours and 9 minutes, but I honestly think that it would have benefited from another 15 minutes at least. I know it's become commonplace to point out the absurd running times for these recent blockbusters, but in this particular case, I think the extra screen time would have helped to flesh out everyone a bit more. Give me one more scene of Clark, Lois, and Perry White at the Daily Planet. Give me one more scene of the Justice Gang or Ultraman. Give me just more of the Kents in general. As it stands, this is a truly great 2-hour, 10-minute movie. But I think it would have been a fantastic 2.5-hour movie. But hey, when the biggest criticism you have with the film you watched is that you wanted to see more of it, then you definitely know the director is doing a good job. And it's funny because going in, my biggest concern for Superman was going to see how the unconventional visual style would turn out. Gunn chose to use a fishbowl lens to shoot everything, and the guy doing the cinematography here also shot The Flash, which looked... yeah. But nah, it actually ended up looking pretty solid. Sure, there's a few shots that looked a bit wonky, but overall, I found the visuals to be refreshing, especially when compared to other recent comic book flicks. It's the kind of visual style that you need to settle in with, and especially view it in the context of the whole movie. And you could say that about several other aspects, like the suit or the dog. There's a nice synergy to the world building, and by the end, I didn't want to leave. This feels 100% like a filmmaker's project, and even though there were a few more jokes and a lighter tone here, as compared to the other DC movies, it still doesn't feel like a Marvel movie. Superman wholeheartedly embraces that it's a comic book brought to life, and it's all the better for it. The character is a symbol of hope that's meant to stand against a world that's more cynical. He's just a guy from Kansas trying to do the right thing, even if he's not 100% sure what that means. And I don't know, man, that story just kind of hits me right now. So in conclusion, I'm gonna give Superman an A-.